Good afternoon. Today is November 21st, 2011. It is just past 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We're here in the Ashley Room at City Hall for an announcement that's extremely important for the city of New Bedford. Over the past 6 years, my administration has sought out any funding that we believe is due the taxpayers of the city of New Bedford. And Irene Shaw, who's our city solicitor, has diligently been pursuing any tortfeasors or anyone that we believe contributed to contaminating our city over the decades when we were one of the #1 industrial cities in the United States. A specific project that both City Solicitor Shaw and myself became aware of when I took office back in January of 2006 was the cleanup of the rail yard, which is now known as Whale's Tooth parking lot and eventually will be the site of the commuter train station in New Bedford. And we realized that a great deal of money was spent, taxpayer money, on this cleanup. And it always struck Attorney Shaw as interesting that there was no contribution from any of the people or any of the entities that may in fact have contributed to the cleanup. Beginning in January of 2006, she began to pursue two things. First, who in fact may or may not have been involved in the contamination, to what extent, and whether or not there were any means of recovery. Now I'm going to put Irene Shaw on, who has served as a city solicitor since the day I took office, who is a well-known attorney throughout our state, to explain exactly what took place here and this particular settlement. I want to say one thing, though, before I turn the mic over to her. First, I know that she worked very hard on this along with a number of different attorneys in the city solicitor's office and a number of very, very dedicated city employees. I have Jim Ritchie here, I have Scott Alphonse here. Many others were involved in helping with analysis and determining exactly what the city had expended on this cleanup. The other thing I want to say is that this is only a small story about other legal actions that have been taken by the city solicitor's office to protect the taxpayers of the city. So Irene now will explain exactly what the process was, how long it took, and what the end result is, and then we will open it up for questions. So this is now time for City Solicitor Irene Shaw to explain this settlement to you.
Thank you. The settlement is a $3 million settlement consisting of $2.6 million in cash and the transfer of $400,000 to roughly $400,000 of value in property of a remaining parcel at the rail yard for a total of approximately $3 million as a settlement. The mayor is quite correct. In 2006, it became known to all of us that there were some unpaid bills and that, in fact, this whole railroad depot project had exhausted its appropriated amount of funds, and so work was being stopped and we were having difficulty paying our bills. We first had to inquire as to the total number. It ended up being in excess of $12 million. We had been awarded up to $5 million, and we proceeded along the rather arduous process of having to total up the amount of bills still remaining to be paid, and then obtaining city council and then legislative approval for borrowing the funds and for paying bills in a subsequent fiscal year according to legal principles for municipal law. Communities are unable to pay for bills incurred in a prior fiscal year with later fiscal year funds. So we're able to straighten that out with help of the legislature as well as Governor Patrick, and ultimately borrowed the full amount that was authorized. And out of those authorized funds, the City Council gave me the sum of $400,000 to use towards retaining outside counsel. And so then in 2007, I retained Greger McGregor and Associates, a Boston environmental firm, to help in the recovery of funds that were expended by the city in cleaning up contamination at the rail yard. We proceeded from 2007, and we came to terms in terms of a signed term sheet only last week. We were very heartened by the movement, which happened as a result of mediation that occurred. The city did not have to file a lawsuit, and it still leaves open the possibility and the claims that are available to the city for other responsible parties at the site for their contamination as well. So this is not the end of the recovery for contamination by others at that site, which will go to benefit the taxpayers. This is only just the beginning. And the total amount of $2.6 million will be allocated towards the bond and thereby reduce the general fund's obligations for payment of that outstanding sum. As far as I know, that anybody can remember, this is the largest settlement the city of New Bedford has ever received for anything. But had it not been for the support of Mayor Lang and the understanding that it takes money to get money, we would not be where we are today, successfully announcing this $3 million settlement. And I thank him for the constant support since I've been here until today.
And then right through to the end, Irene, you can be assured of that, right? Now, let's open it up to questions, and then I've got a couple of overviews on this that I think may help bring some the proper perspective regarding this type of legal action that we took. So, any questions for anyone at first, for myself or the city solicitor?
So fair to say this has been a 5-year process. I heard the year 2006 thrown out there. Can I say that this is the end of a 5-year process? Is that accurate?
This is the end regarding these parties of a 5-year process. That's correct.
Okay. And does the city own the land now, or who owns the land?
City owns the land now, and the city just picked up a parcel, which means we have full control over the land, which is extremely important going forward for both freight and passenger rail service. Now
Commonwealth has some land.
Well, it's either us or the state now that owns all the property in that area.
Okay. And it's a former railroad depot, and it's currently a parking lot. Is that what we're talking about?
That's correct.
It's more than just a parking lot. There's some green area. If you go on Route 18 and you look over towards the water, you'll see a very large area of just vacant land. That's the railroad depot as well. So it's more than just the Whale Street parking lot. The acreage that the city of New Bedford would own after the transfer to it would be approximately 23 acres. City of New Bedford Housing 70 redevelopment and Harbor Development Corporation Commission.
The thing is that there are active railroad tracks on there as well now.
Yes.
Okay. And who owns those? Who owns the?
Well, it's on our land now, but the fact is that it's the state has worked out a deal with Mass Coastal, which is running the freight operation through those tracks. EPA also has rights to those tracks by way of the Superfund cleanup in the Acushnet River. And those tracks are hoped to be used for passenger rail in the future as well.
And was this basically because the land was contaminated? Is that what the city's getting money for? Because these drains are contaminated? If so, what kind of contamination are we talking about?
It's the typical New Bedford soup of contaminants. There were PCBs, lead, arsenic, PAHs, so that the monies that we expended were not only for the cleanup but also for replacing the rail that had to be taken up in order to have the contamination be remediated. We own a small portion of the rail, about 20 to 30 feet, and then the rest is actually on Commonwealth land, which used to be the railroad's land.
Okay. And is this, I'm going to guess that this isn't unusual for an old railroad or a parcel that was at one point an old railroad depot. I mean, it's pretty typical.
Well, I think what's unusual is the firms that were operating in New Bedford at that time were heavy PCB operators. In fact, our research would indicate that CDE probably was the largest user of PCBs in the United States.
I know who CSX is. I'm unfamiliar with American Premier Underwriters. What kind
American Premier Underwriters, basically the insurer for the former Penn Central.
Okay.
And so there is no longer a Penn Central.
Okay.
And they basically stood in the shoes of Penn Central.
Okay. And Consolidated Rail Corporation, who are they?
That's another railroad entity. Some of these are still in existence, though the operations are all done by CSX, but some of the land was owned by Consolidated Rail Corporation, Conrail, as well.
Okay. How long ago was it an active railroad depot, approximately?
I don't think I know.
Decades? I mean,
Decades and decades.
50 years or?
Well, most of this contamination occurred 40s to 60s.
Okay.
Can you tell us what this means for passenger, the possibility of passenger rail in New Bedford?
Well, I think it makes it, from our perspective, much more likely that the state is dealing with either their own entity or dealing with the city of New Bedford when they're laying out configuration for rail. So I think that's important. It also takes away the idea that somehow there'll be added value to a piece of property because of all the work that we did, all the work that the state does. So it really benefits the taxpayers from the standpoint of putting the land back in the public, the public treasury to label it correctly. I also think, though, that it has some profound meaning, I think, for this city. And that's, we know that we had tremendous, glorious industrialized past. We also know that as a result, we have contaminants in many parts of the city. This is a perfect example of the city of New Bedford working cooperatively with the responsible parties to bring about some fairness to the taxpayers. Because up until today, we've had a situation where the companies that were involved in the spoliation of the land ended up leaving, ended up not having responsibility. And by the city drawing a line and indicating that we understand we have a responsibility to clean it up, but we certainly expect that people participate in in some sort of compensation for the city for cleaning up contaminants is a very important principle. It also is something I think that is unusual in that Irene started basically from scratch with this, not a file, not any information, and had to build the history to see exactly what had happened. So did an awful lot of forensics, and then we had an awful lot of work done by Jim Ritchie. Ron LaBella has just come in. I want to thank Ron. Scott Alphonse, to pinpoint exactly what their city's responsibility should have been, what the responsibility of private corporations should be. And then we got a cooperative cooperative dialogue going. Irene did a great job. Irene is the one who negotiated it out, worked with a mediator, because everyone realized that it cost far more money to litigate it and end up with a final result, which everyone was unsure of, than to sit down and do it in a fair way. The key on this was that last piece of property was extremely important in this settlement. Because what we did not want to do is receive cash and then eventually have to buy back a piece of property that we felt in the long run it was important to control for the public health and safety as well as long-term economic development of the city.
How big is that piece of property?
It's 3.2 acres.
And the last thing you want to do is clean it up, have everything exactly the way you want it, and realize that a private entity now will benefit from it because you need that piece of land. And so we wanted to get this done. As far as the last thing I want to say is City Solicitor Shaw has indicated this is the beginning. We're talking with a number of different companies. We do have a lawsuit that has been filed regarding other responsible parties in other parts of the city, and we think this is a very, very good method to resolve these issues, get everyone to kick in, and taxpayers are whole again, and we move forward and clean this city, and that's extremely important.
What is the $12 million figure that Ms. Shaw stated early on in her presentation? What was that figure?
That figure was a loan amount that was approved by the City Council on which we drew to pay for the work that was done at the railroad, which included not only remediation but also construction of the Whale's Tooth parking lot as well as reconstruction of the rail.
Now, the money you received, did that pay for the cleanup totally, or?
No, it did not. It did not, and we still have other parties that we would be looking to, we hope, reach a settlement with. If not, we will intend to litigate as we have on Parker Street.
As far as the math goes, Jim, my understanding is the city originally received $5 million to do this cleanup. It cost 12. City Council then had to authorize 12. There was no clawback, no contingency that you go after the responsible parties. That was something that my administration decided any time we can, let's get paid back, and that Irene successfully did. So now we still have in essence a bond on this of about $7 million. And by using the 2.6, we bring that down now to what is it, 4.4, and we'll keep chiseling away at it. I don't know whether we have any other obligation financially based on the first 5, but it's an important project. These are all great projects as long as the taxpayers come out on top. Otherwise, we're subsidizing the cleanup of property that we did not spoil, and that's something that we just don't want to be doing.
And what exactly does this mean for South Coast Rail?
What this does is 2 things. One, I think it assures that we now have land control, which is extremely important to move forward on South Coast Rail. The other thing it does, though, I think, is make sure that we end up having clean land throughout the entire area. We're going to have people, there's an awful lot of economic development that's going to take place there, whether it's freight or passenger, whether it's smart growth. We want to make sure that we have an overview on this property where we control it, we own it, and understand exactly what benefit it can bring. And we don't, the last thing we want is to end up doing all this work and end up having a private entity come in and say, the land that, because you've improved everything around it, the land that we own now is worth double, triple, quadruple what it was prior to you doing the work.
Okay, and so is the cleanup ongoing? Is that process ongoing, or is it done? Where's that process at?
The process is nearly complete. There are just some plans that need to be signed and approved, and we just need to go through that final approval process with both EPA and DEP, but essentially all of the work is done.
Okay. How many other companies are you talking with in an effort to recover money? Is there?
We haven't begun talking with the other parties yet. It was my intention to settle up with the railroads first and then proceed with the other parties. But they would be the same parties as you would see at the Parker Street case. So that first among them would be Cornell Dubelier and AVX, formerly Aerovox.
Okay. Can you touch on the status of South Coast Rail, just in general too?
Well, I think, the status of South Coast Rail probably has as much to do with the status of the super committee's actions in the next day as anything else. South Coast Rail is a great environmental project. It's a great economic development project. It'll generate a tremendous amount of work as well as construction work, and then work by way of smart growth as people develop around the rail. My understanding right now is there was a time frame that the governor had of December of 2016 to begin running South Coast passenger service. Now, as a result of permitting delays by both time frame that the Army Corps of Engineers as well as now EPA involved in their permitting process, we're about 18 months behind schedule regarding actual permitting. Now, you can make up that time if the permitting came through tomorrow by way of an accelerated construction schedule. But the fact of the matter is that at this point, while waiting for the permitting, we're still continuing to try and work on an economic viable manner to fund the project, and we have not begun construction. My plan on this, which I've been advocating for the past several years, in fact probably since 2006 when I first walked in, is start building parts of the project that we don't have any permit issues on. So for instance, we could build from New Bedford to Taunton right now. We could build from Fall River to Taunton right now. It's existing rail bed. It needs an upgrade because we're starting to run more and more freight on this rail area, and that would get you now to Taunton. So you'd build the golden triangle here of Fall River, New Bedford, Taunton. And then by that time, hopefully, when you're done with building continuously welded rail, replacing the ballast, shoring up the rail beds, you'd now have permitting, and you'd be able to go through Hockomock Swamp or some other way to get you to either east or west to get you to Boston. The other thing is that we have had bridge work done here, and it's been very, very successful. We've done 3 more bridges in New Bedford under Tiger grants over the last year. We're almost done. We're well ahead of schedule and under budget on that. We need about 25% of the Wamsutta Mill Bridge to be redone, and then we've done away with all our 100-year-old bridges in the city, and we can start moving freight at a realistic rate, now 30 to 40 miles an hour, rather than right now having to have an individual get off the train and walk the train across the bridge, which I don't understand the rationale for that. If you have to walk the train across the bridge, it seems to me the person who walks it across the bridge wants to be very far from the bridge. But the fact is that they have a requirement that you actually walk the train across the bridge at 5 miles an hour. We need to resolve that. We need to build 21st century rail. So the answer is, we think that the project will be built, but it comes down to right now timing, and it comes down to the whole philosophy regarding putting people to work in the economic status of the United States.
Ms. Shaw, did I hear you correctly say that, as far as you're concerned, this is the largest settlement the city has received in its history? Is that accurate to say?
Yes.
And this was done through a mediator. It wasn't. The city didn't file any litigation over this, or it's done.
We filed a lawsuit only to. We did not serve it, to ensure that the railroads would keep their feet firmly on the pedal and allow us to bring this to a successful conclusion without having to actually utilize any court process.
And the settlement was reached and finalized last week?
Yes, the term sheet was finalized last Thursday, and we are still in the process of actually just writing out a settlement agreement, and it's at that time when the settle agreement is inked that we'll get the checks and that the deeds will be conveyed to us.
And then we'll dismiss the lawsuit.
Right.
The other thing I want to mention on this, Irene, two things I should say. First, at no time did we ever regard the individual companies that are settling as all of the parties in the suit. So at no time did we ask them to take responsibility for more than we thought was their fair share based on what we thought we could prove. Number one. Number two, I think in good faith they stepped up, acknowledged the areas that they thought that they should have responsibility for, and it came down to negotiating out a settlement, which Irene did. The other thing is that I think Irene has far bigger fish to fry on other areas in the city, and that this is a model that we'll use to try and get this done. But certainly there are others there in the city that have cost the city and the city taxpayers or state taxpayers far more than the cleanup at the rail yard, and we will proportionally look for our fair share in those areas of the city. So it would not surprise me at all if as further settlements come down the pike or further litigation takes place, that this 2.6 plus the $400,000 worth of 3.2 acres of land is dwarfed by future settlements.
Are those the usual suspects? Parker Street, New Bedford Harbor? Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, I think anywhere that we have caused the government in one way or another to assume the role of cleaning up property for public health and safety. Those are areas that, if it is possible and we can identify responsible parties, we will ask for their contribution.
Ms. Shaw, is it possible to identify responsible parties in the Parker Street situation?
Well, we have made certainly efforts to do that through the litigation. The litigation has been rather time-consuming, and we've been awaiting a number of decisions by the judge, so that discovery has not gone along as far as I would have hoped at this point. But we have our named defendants, which include Monsanto, they include Cornell Dubilier, they include AVX. We have a number of minor players that dealt with construction or movement of the soil. Now, those contractors or installers would not have had a role in the railroad, but all of those defendants are currently named in our Parker Street lawsuit, and should we discover others through the course of discovery, then we would be adding other responsible parties as well.
We're also getting cooperation now from EPA regarding forensics and responsible parties, which I think is very helpful. The federal government working with us to identify responsible parties is crucial, because they have been down this pike before regarding Sullivan's Ledge and the Superfund site. So the work that they did is instrumental to us being able to identify responsible parties.
Regarding the railroad depot situation, you had mentioned that you did file suit, even though it doesn't sound like you pursued that process. What venue did you file suit in, and when did you file suit?
I think I filed the lawsuit on, I think it's Friday, October 28th. This year. It was, we had actually had an agreement in principle. There were an army, or at least a platoon of lawyers from the various railroad entities, and it was becoming a little bit cumbersome dealing with all of them. They had to receive various authorities, they had to go back and forth among them, and I was concerned that the delay was, let's put it this way, I wanted to protect the city in the event that the delay meant more than it did, which was just difficulty there dealing with themselves as well as their various boards in the various corporate entities. I'm a belts and suspenders attorney from time to time, and when it comes to protecting the city's interest, I felt that filing the lawsuit was our best protection to, again, make sure that the settlement, although it had been agreed on in principle, that we could actually come to a signed term sheet, which we did last week.
And did you file that in Bristol Superior?
No, that was filed in Federal District Court in Boston.
Federal District Court, okay.
And that was filed by Gregor McGregor on our behalf.
Now, I just want to say one thing. I know that I've described Irene as just a consummate attorney, litigator, did a fantastic job in negotiating this settlement. But I know now that the only thing that'll be said is that she's a belts and suspendered attorney, and I just want to say that she's that and a lot more. Did a great job on this, and we're off and running. I think this is a clear indication to everyone that we're dealing with that we are very willing to resolve these issues, but we're also very willing to litigate them if we can't come to an amicable resolution.
And I regretted it as soon as I said it, but I'll say this, that the point was that I didn't want, while we were going through the mediation, when I say belts and suspenders, I was going to pursue the litigation claim while I was pursuing the mediation, and I didn't want the railroads to think that in any way we lacked the energy or the fortitude to proceed in a litigation mode if need be. And so that was the message that I wanted to convey, which was easy way or hard way, I think is maybe a better way to put it. So I was happy to do it through mediation, and that turned out to be the successful path. But if it's not the successful path with others, then we will proceed with litigation.
All right, anything else? So thank you very much for coming today. I want to congratulate City Solicitor Shaw, and we'll keep everyone posted. We think that this is the beginning of a process in which we begin to receive money back for the City of New Bedford from responsible parties, tortfeasors that are involved in cleanups that we pursue. So thank you very much, everyone.
Happy birthday, dear Corinne. Happy birthday to you.
Your choice to recycle can affect more people than you think. Call Marissa at 508-979-1493 to request your free recycling bins. This message was brought to you by the City of New Bedford and UMass Dartmouth Charlton School of Business.